He's having trouble reading, Laura.
When they gaze upon Yosemites, towering sequoias.
There's something off there, and how many gaffes can you make every single day?
This is the very definition of totalitarianism.
He increasingly sounds like one of those bad lip-reading videos you see on the internet.
They delivered a swift and sweeping, you know that, sweeping. It was swift and it was sweeping.
We find that he has trouble getting through the words.
France, Japan, Sweden, Finland. Ulysses S. Grant in Minneapolis. Thank the Minneapolis police. Just like we did in Minneapolis. Plasma. We need plasma.
The poor man, he can't read a prompter either.
The same spirit that drove America's founders.
He doesn't even know what year it is.
The choice in 220 for all new homes, offices, and buildings by 230 in April of 2014.
Has difficulty keeping his train of thought.
Blazing fast, broad walk, and if you think I am announcing that my administration is
But he's on an obstacle course that makes it look like he is just not up to this job.
Why are these Trump supporters attacking Donald Trump? Well, it's updated, Willie. I mean, every time the attacks come, you just find some more clips of Donald Trump just wandering around. I mean, you know, the Jonathan Swan interview. By the way, I was off yesterday and missed the Jonathan Swan interview, the part where he was
with the charts and the graphs.
The papers in his face and the charts and the graphs. And I just say there, first of all, let's talk about Jonathan Swan for a second. I mean, you know, when Chris Wallace comes at you, he's got some nunchucks in one hand and he's got a club with spikes in the other. Jonathan Swan is a little more subtle. He's like, well, so would you like a brownie? And you don't realize what you've eaten until you wake up the next morning at the bottom of an elevator shaft. He's very subtle and very polite. But you wake up the next morning at the bottom of the elevator shaft. It was a remarkable and you look at the president's face and he looked completely lost. He didn't know where he was. It really was as disoriented as I think I've ever seen the man on the camera, and that's saying an awful lot.
Well, it's amazing when he's presented with facts, which is what Jonathan Swan did for him. When he handed in those graphs, he said, oh, no, you're looking at this the wrong way. There's no second beat there. He doesn't know where to go once he's confronted with the facts. But if I had a nickel for every night I ended up at the bottom of an elevator shaft after hanging out with Jonathan Swan, Joe, I'd be a wealthy man. You and I both.
Well, why do you think that just came off the top of my head? Of course, it's happened to both of us before, but we didn't know how we got there. But here, I just want to show a clip of this again, following that Comedy Central mash. Here's Jonathan Swan again with the president.
The figure I look at is death. And death is going up now. Okay, and it's 1,000 a day.
If you look at death...
Yeah, it's going up again.
Let's look.
Daily death.
Take a look at some of these charts.
I'd love to.
We're going to look.
Let's look.
And if you look at death...
Yeah. It's started to go up again.
One. Well, right here, the United States is lowest in numerous categories. We're lower than the world.
Lower than the world?
Lower than
what is that?
Europe.
In what?
Look.
In what?
Take a look. Right here. Here's case death.
Oh, you're doing death as a proportion of cases. I'm talking about death as a proportion of population. That's where the US is really bad.
Well,
much worse than South Korea, Germany, etc.
You can't do that. You have
Why
to go,
can't I do that?
Well,
look at South Korea, for example. 51 million population, 300 deaths. It's like, it's crazy.
You don't know that.
I do. It's
you
on the.
Don't know that.
You think they're faking their statistics? South Korea?
I won't get into that because I have a very good relationship with the country. But you don't know that. And they have spikes. Look, here's
Germany low, 9,000.
Here's one right here, United States. You take the number of cases. Okay. Now look, we're last, meaning we're first.
Last? I don't know what we're first in. As a what?
Take a look. Okay. Again, it's cases.
Okay.
And we have cases... Because of the testing.
1,000 Americans are dying a day. But I understand on cases, it's different.
No, but you're not reporting it correctly, Jonathan.
I think I am, but...
If you take a look at this other chart, Look, this is our testing, I believe. This is the testing, yeah.
60,000 Americans are in hospital.
If you watch the
1,000
news
dying
or
a
read
day.
the papers, they usually talk about new cases, new cases, new cases.
I'm talking about death.
Well, you look at
going
death.
up.
Death is way down from where it was.
It's 1,000 a
Death.
day. It was 2,500. It went down to 500. Now it's going up again.
Excuse me, where it was is much higher than where it is right now.
It went down and it went up again.
But now it's going down again. It's going
up.
down in Arizona. It's going down in Florida.
Nationally,
it's going down in Texas. Take a look at this. These are the tests.
It's going down in Florida?
I mean, and I'm really serious about this. If he weren't president of the United States, we wouldn't play that clip on the air, because he looked so disoriented that people would say that we were being cruel, taking advantage of somebody on the air. But he clearly was disoriented, didn't know what he was talking about, scrambled facts. I mean, John, let me bring it. We have John Meacham. John Meacham, let me bring you in here. He is president of the United States, and I'd like to ask you what presidential precedents we have for a performance that disorienting and that bad. But I'm afraid maybe we need to go into the realm of, like, TV shows. Did that remind you more of Mr. Haney from Green Acres or Festus from Gunsmoke? I mean,
and where's Arnold the pig?
You know what?
Where's
You
Arnold the
have to
pig?
play the cards that are handed to you.
I understand. I appreciate that. The Nick at Night references, I think even Willie is too young to understand what you just said. So that's pretty phenomenal.
I study the history of TV the way you study the history of presidencies, John. Yeah.
Oh, that explains so
So I'm
much.
good. That's
Actually,
it.
there's
Yeah.
there's a certain clarity now about your career choices. I like it. I like it. No, and it's sort of, again, we can be somewhat lighthearted about it, but it's at heart, at best, discomforting, and at worst, terrifying. And what I had, and both of you know this, you know, when you do what we do for a living, you get a lot of mail, particularly in the old days. You get manila folders from people who had found the key to everything. And it went from the book of Genesis through the Council on Foreign Relations, and would end up with George Herbert Walker Bush in Dallas during the Kennedy assassination. You know, to be this sort of odd conspiracy theories, but rendered as if it were factual, right? So just watching it right now, I was thinking, this is like getting, you know, a PowerPoint deck from Area 50, was it Area 54?
51.
And
51, I think, yeah.
51, sorry. See, there you go. Good job, boy. Car 52, sorry. But I think, to me, and I hope that the power of satire with what Trevor Noah is doing, although, as our friend Christopher Buckley says, it's hard to satirize someone who self-satirizes all the time, in the case of President Trump. I hope that gets into the consciousness, because the attack on Vice President Biden about his coherence and all that is going to get worse, a lot worse, because it's about all they've got. It's been very interesting to sort of keep an eye on the social media stuff about what Trumpistan has to argue. And none of the arguments, this is fascinating for this point in a presidential campaign, none of the arguments on substance have any salience. Can you think of one? There's perspective, right? There are perspective audience arguments like, oh, he's going to, you know, drive us into a socialist future. Nobody believes that. Joe, you and I have talked about, there's a much better chance that Joe Biden will end up somewhat centering the Democratic Party than anybody is going to come along and center the Republican Party. And so, and I think that's an existential threat to a Republican Party that has sold its soul, the check bounced, and they've got to figure out, you know, what are they going to do to attempt to be something approaching a majority party in this demographically changing country. And my bet, just quickly, my bet is sometime in the middle of November of this year, because it's going to take a while to count the ballots. Let's not talk about election night, right? Let's talk about election week, as people have been arguing. Let's not set up a false expectation that we're all going to know everything, and that David Brinkley's going to come back and tell us right at the right time, because that plays into Trump's hands, because chaos helps him. Mm-hmm. But I suspect that if there is even a blue wave-ish, a wavelet, there's going to be a point before the end of the year where a lot of Republicans are going to be saying, Donald who? No, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know who that is.
Yeah.
And if they do, it's going to be because of that kind of clip.
Well, and that is exactly what's going to happen. I can tell you that a lot of the same people that are blindly defending Donald Trump right now were viciously attacking me when I was criticizing George W. Bush's foreign policy in the second term, and also criticizing his spending and huge deficits, and asking why I was a socialist, why I was a left-winger, why, when I had become a left-wing radical, when I was actually attacking him because he'd abandoned all conservative concepts as far as I was concerned. And, of course, the second George W. Bush got out of office, they started saying the same thing and then went overboard. And now the attacks, oh, my God, you would think George W. Bush was a socialist. The same thing will happen with Donald Trump. It's the game that they've been playing. I remember in 2012, me getting viciously attacked by people for criticizing Mitt Romney's campaign. Mitt's a friend of mine, the family's a friend of mine, but he was running what I thought was an uninspired campaign and was attacking him. And the same people who are defending Donald Trump now were viciously attacking me and defending Mitt Romney, if you can believe it. It's bizarre behavior. It's happened in the past. It's going to happen this year, too. If Donald Trump loses, it'll be Donald who by December, and everybody will be writing their books about how I won the war, how I saved the world from, the chaos of this man. But you look at the clip, those clips of Jonathan Swan, and you just see this is a campaign that is completely blocked in. I mean, they're talking about you don't want 4 debates if you're running Donald Trump's campaign. He may say he wants 4 debates. You don't want 4 debates. Look at the Jonathan Swan interview. He was completely lost. He had a blank, dead look in his eye. He was completely out of his element. He has been allowed to live like autocrats in his own world for the past 4 years, where he makes up an alternate reality, sets out an alternative set of facts, and he doesn't have anybody around him that's challenging him. That's not somebody that you want out on the stage 1 debate night, let alone 4 debate nights. So this suggestion that they do is foolish. Every time he goes out there, he's going to look just as bad as he did with Jonathan Swan. I mean, Joe Biden wasn't great in some of the early debates, but he did a lot of debates. Like he's been out there more than Donald Trump has. And John, you bring up a great point about their arguments. What are they going to do? Are they really going to argue that Joe Biden is out of it? Because every time they do, there's a clip where Donald Trump looks as bad or worse. Are they going to really talk about China? Because every time they do, there's a clip or a tweet about Donald Trump cozying up to President Xi, congratulating him for being a strongman, congratulating him for consolidating power more than any leader in China since Chairman Mao, congratulating him for being such a great leader on the coronavirus, or the Wuhan virus, as the president called it, after he forgot that he had thanked President Xi on behalf of Americans for doing such an incredible job on the coronavirus. I mean, he really has nowhere to go. And let's bring in Jonathan Lemire here. Jonathan, White House aides have to be absolutely dazed by the president's horrid performance in front of Jonathan Swan, a confused, bumbling, rambling performance where they're just, again, his face, his eyes, it's like he wasn't there. Do they really want a 4th debate?
So, Joe, this is now the second high-profile interview in recent weeks the president has really struggled with. The one with Chris Wallace on Fox a few weeks ago being the other. The aides have suggested they don't think this one quite has the traction. It was on HBO. One aide yesterday dismissed it as, quote, liberal porn to me, thinking it was unfair. But, of course, we all can watch the clips. There's no editing here.
I'm sorry. Wait. What was liberal porn? He got all the facts wrong. I'm a conservative. I'm a lifelong conservative. I was a conservative before Donald Trump lied about being a conservative. I'm a conservative after he will leave being conservative. I'm more conservative than all of these people that have followed this autocrat in training. What are they saying is liberal porn? That he got all the facts wrong? Have they really put themselves in a corner now where if you go along with facts, if you go along with statistics, that makes you a liberal?
Well, that's their argument, and it certainly has not proven to gain any traction in recent days. Joe, one thing that interview also did was dismiss what would have been a recent White House talking point about the coronavirus, i.e. the mortality rate. They were hanging their hats on that it was lower. That, of course, has changed in recent weeks, so they're back to the drawing board on that. But you raise a question about whether they're boxed into a corner, and the answer is yes. This is a campaign now. We're under 3 months until Election Day, and as you and I have been talking about a lot, we're now under 1 month until early voting begins in a number of battleground states, including North Carolina, in which the president really doesn't have a path to win without capturing the Tar Heel state. And yet they're running out of time and set pieces to turn the narrative of this campaign around. We know the convention has been completely upended. The president will certainly give a speech at some point, but it's not going to be the 4-day celebration he had hoped. He's unable to hold any rallies. He is trying to substitute smaller events, both official and political, to take that space. I'm traveling with him today to Ohio, where he is doing a couple of things. But let's point, even as a pause on that, he's got to go to Ohio, a state that a few months ago they thought they had in the bag. And now he's got to spend some time and resources there. So they are putting a lot of eggs in the baskets of the debate. The campaign, as you mentioned yesterday, called for a fourth debate, one that's earlier. Right now, the first debate is scheduled for the end of September, and they want one at the beginning of September, coinciding with the beginning of early voting. To this point, the Biden campaign has said no to that. They said that we have agreed to the 3 with the Federal Debate Commission. We will stick with that. But it goes to show you the White House and the president, they're running out of moves. They feel like they can do well in the debates. They do plan to sort of highlight when Joe Biden stumbles or get a fact wrong or something like that. But it also just opens up the litany of clips that the president has done so in the past, and, of course, the risk on the debate stage that he, not Joe Biden, may be the one suffering the verbal implosion.
So let's talk about some of those facts the president's bumping up against. The United States averaged more than 1,000 daily deaths from coronavirus for a 10th consecutive day yesterday, in addition to more than 51,000 new cases. This comes as an analysis from the Associated Press finds testing in the United States declined by 3.6% over the past 2 weeks. According to the AP, officials largely attribute the drop to Americans becoming discouraged over having to wait hours to get a test and days or even weeks to get their result back, rendering that result meaningless. 22 states saw declines, the report says. Places like Alabama, Mississippi, Missouri, and Iowa, where, quote, the percentage of positive tests is high and continuing to climb, an indicator that the virus is still spreading uncontrolled there. Testing largely is seen by health officials, as you know, as the key to reopening schools and businesses. Meanwhile, President Trump continues to claim the virus will just disappear.
The country's in very good shape, and we're set to rock and roll. This thing's going away. It will go away like things go away.
It'll go away like things go away. Absolutely. It's no question in my mind. It will go away. Please go ahead. Hopefully sooner rather than later.
Let's bring in politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University, politics editor at the Griot, and an MSNBC political contributor, Jason Johnson, and national political correspondent for Time, Molly Ball, is with us. She wrote the cover story for the new issue on ways the COVID-19 pandemic is transforming the 2020 election. Good morning to you both. Jason, he's still now 6 months into this. The president is wishing this away, saying it's just going to go away the way things go away. And we saw his ineptitude in that interview when confronted with the facts that voters and Americans are seeing in their own lives around them about what's really happening, and that it, in fact, is not going to just go away.
Yeah, Willie. I mean, first off, the only difference between the interview that the president did with Jonathan Swan and that crazy press conference that we saw from Kanye West a couple weeks ago is that he didn't burst into tears. I mean, he clearly has no handle on what he's talking about and what he wants to do. And regardless of what the numbers may say, in some states, there's a little bit less testing. Some states, there seems to be a bit of a spike. We know one thing. As kids go back to school, as college students go back to campus, we are seeing spikes. We are seeing spikes in elementary schools in Indiana. We are seeing spikes in high schools in Georgia. I don't see any reason. If anyone was able to fool themselves this summer and believe the president's fake statistics, well, maybe it's going down, I don't know anyone. That's not going to be the case as we have dozens and dozens of children who are going to be sent home from schools over the next couple of weeks with the coronavirus. The president has no plan, rhetorically or strategically, for how to handle this. And as people head to the polls in the next month, they're going to be voting with that anger, that frustration, and that fear of what he hasn't been able to handle so far.
Yeah, and the man in that interview with Jonathan Swan, the reason this is so deadly serious is he's the guy with the keys to the car. He's the guy who could decide that we'd have a national testing program. He's the guy who could have modeled mask wearing for all these months, but has chosen not to because he thinks it's just going to go away. Molly Ball, let's talk about your cover story for Time Magazine, ways this pandemic is going to impact the 2020 election and already is impacting the 2020 election. How did you come at this? Because there are so many different ways you could look at, including in the way we vote with mail-in voting, which the president has said is fraudulent and said will lead to a rigged election.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there are so many ways that this election has been transformed by the pandemic. So we wanted to zoom out the lens and look at all of that and look at the ways that it has just completely changed the context of this election. You know, there's the logistics piece of it. You were talking a little bit earlier about the conventions. That's one part of this election that will be unlike any other in our memories because of the coronavirus. And campaigns have had to get creative and figure out how to adapt to a world where it is very difficult and potentially risky to campaign in person. So we're seeing them take different approaches and do that in different ways. The voting, as you mentioned, we have not seen this scale of change in the way Americans vote in any recent election, and it is a massive transformation. Of course, things were moving in this direction anyway, with early voting and mail voting already becoming prevalent in a lot of states, but this is going to be an overnight change for a lot of people. And that poses a lot of stress to the system, to an election system that was already fragile, that was already subject to, things like foreign interference and other risks. Now this additional strain is being put on it, and it's changing so quickly that a lot of states still can't say for sure exactly what the procedures will be for people to be able to safely submit their ballots. And then the big picture is the way that it has changed the way people feel about this election, right? The way that the whole context for voters has changed in terms of how they look at the candidates, in terms of how they evaluate the state of the country, right? You just played that clip of Trump saying that the country's in a great place. Americans don't believe that these days. The share of people who think that we're on the right track has absolutely plummeted in a very short period of time. And so the things that people value, the things that people are looking for from their leaders, that has all changed as we grapple with this pandemic. And as people look around and say, actually, I want a leader who listens to experts. I want a leader who's compassionate. And so all of these attempts that Trump and his campaign have made to change the subject, refocus on the issues that he prefers to talk about, have really fallen flat because the pandemic has so become the center of our national consciousness, of our national conversation. So I think when one day, hopefully, we look back on this coronavirus pandemic, the election is going to be an inextricable part of that. It is part of the way that we are dealing with this pandemic as a nation is coming together and using our democracy to figure out how we get out of it.
Well, and John Meacham, it's fascinating. You started to talk about this earlier. Donald Trump's really, he's running for re-election, but he's running for re-election without a theme. You look through the years, like 1960, John Kennedy talked about getting America moving again and talked about a missile gap, to trying to draw a contrast with Ike's vice president, Richard Nixon. 20 years later, Ronald Reagan was running against what he called the malaise of Jimmy Carter's 4 years, talking about making America great again. 20 years after that, George W. Bush I think in reaction to Newt Gingrich and some of us that came along throughout the 1990s talked about compassionate conservatism, trying to expand conservatism's reach into the suburbs more effectively. And here we are 20 years later, and Donald Trump is themeless. He doesn't even like to talk. He's asked, what do you want to do over the next 4 years if you get reelected? He can't answer that question. He's been given an opportunity to answer that question repeatedly. He has no answers. And we heard yesterday in the press conference his coronavirus strategy. I mean, think about this. Over 155,000 people dead. And it's not getting better. It's getting worse in many parts of America. Over 155,000 people dead. And his response, his reaction, his game plan, well, it'll go away like things go away. This is beyond. This is unprecedented. This is like no presidential reelection campaign we've ever seen, because it is utterly themeless, utterly devoid of plans, and is as directionless as it could be.
Yeah. Vice President Biden has a great example in Ronald Reagan. As you say, 40 years ago now, a biblical 40 years ago, Ronald Reagan broke away from Jimmy Carter in the last week of the campaign. Remember, the debate in Cleveland was on October 28th. It was on Tuesday. The election was on November 4th. And Reagan, because he didn't show up and drool at the ancient age of 69. Remember, that was way too old now. I mean, you would be a junior pledge in the White House in the current demography of the presidential candidates at 69. And he framed that question that endures today. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go to the stores and buy things than it was 4 years ago? Biden can say, can you go to the stores then, in the same way you could 4 years ago? And Reagan, he ran through a series of things, more respected, secure. And he said, and if your answer is yes, then, and he nodded that head over at Jimmy Carter. He said, then your vote is very clear. If your answer is no, you aren't better off than you were 4 years ago, I can suggest a different course. And the numbers began to move in that last week. And there are two kinds of elections, really, in presidential politics. This is just my opinion and division of them. There are nuance elections where Kennedy-Nixon in 1960 would be one where, in real time, Arthur Schlesinger had to write a book in September of 1960. Kennedy's advisor, Kennedy's speechwriter, saying, Kennedy versus Nixon, does it make any difference? The fact that the Kennedy campaign had to frame that question in the fall of 1960 tells you that in that era, they weren't seen as distinct as, of course, history has made them. Does Trump versus Biden, does it make any difference? Hell yeah. And it's a pretty straightforward argument, it seems to me. The other thing quickly, and this goes to Molly's point, and I look forward to her piece, is I really do think, and Ben Smith wrote a column about this in the Times this week, we do have to find a way to adjust our internal ambient clocks to see that the election may not be fully decided by 11 o'clock in the East on election night, because of the nature of the ballots, because of the volume one imagines that's going to come out. And I just worry that, again, the king of Trumpistan is going to try to suggest, because he thinks in TV blocks, right? The Apprentice, you get an answer at a certain point. He likes having an answer at a certain point. And if it's not there, he believes that knocks ordinary folks sort of off their axis a little bit, and they begin to think that things are astray, and therefore he is going to step in and put things back into order. We need to figure out a way to have a conversation to make people ready for this immense task, counting these millions, tens and tens and tens of millions of ballots. It may take a couple of days. And I think we have to prepare for that.
That's important, and federal election officials, John, have come on this show to make that exact point, which is to say those hours, those days that may go on after election night when you don't know who won are not filled with chaos. They're filled with people certifying votes to make sure we get the vote right, and it will be longer than usual, likely given all the mail-in voting. We're just getting started here. Still ahead on Morning Joe, health experts not only pushing for more testing, but the need for rapid testing. We will talk to a top infectious disease doctor about how we go about doing that. Plus, bipartisan pushback against the president's plan to hold his convention speech on the South Lawn of the White House. He floated that idea yesterday. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.